Happy Monday, Matt.
Happy Monday. How's it going, Joe?
Doing good. Pretty tired, but
You had some adventures this weekend, correct?
yeah, I did. I went to the middle of nowhere in the desert and hiked to a top secret bouldering spot, and it was a long day. So got a lot of climbing in, but got a lot of hiking and uh, basically construction work in as well. So that was pretty fun. And yeah, I'm just pretty beat right now. So if I
Nice.
seem kind of
My,
out of it right now, then that's why. So.
very nice. My weekend was decidedly more banal. I went climbing at the gym on Friday. That's about all I did, which befits my level on climbing. So I
Super
did some work.
hardcore.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Yeah, we live pretty exciting lives here.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Trying to find some excitement in the time of COVID, especially in Utah, where it's absolutely crazy right now.
Well, I'll tell you, what was kind of crazy was the drive back from where we were, Route 6, which
Yeah.
is the road. If people don't know, Route 6 is the road you take to get to the desert. One road you take to get to the desert. It's also a very busy road. And when we pulled up, um, to get onto 6, we noticed there was a line of cars basically from end to end, as far as you could see. Probably like 1,000 cars or more on it. So that was fun being on the road for hour and a half in traffic trying to drive 10 miles. So, but it is what it is because people like going to the desert these days. So,
Yeah, changing nature of the outdoors. It's hard to get to a really isolated spot these days. It's a challenge.
hmm yeah. Thankfully, that's where I was yesterday. It's like about as isolated as you're gonna get. So, sucks if you broke your foot or something worse. You kind of on your own out there. So,
Call a
but
helicopter or something. Yeah.
you don't have phone service.
Bring your sat
So
phone. Yeah.
yeah, I'm pretty screwed. Anyway, on that cheery note, I think we want to talk about marketing data warehouses today. So,
Yeah.
marketing data warehouses are something that we do a lot of work in. We've kind of, I don't know that we set out to start Ternary around marketing data warehouses, but some of our earliest work involved, marketing data warehouses and continues to, involve that type of work. So, I guess, how would you describe a marketing data warehouse? Like, what is it for somebody who doesn't know what that is?
I mean, I would say the big difference, and we were talking about this a bit before we started the recording, but traditional data warehousing was mostly about internal company data. And a marketing data warehouse tends to be much more about external data, such as Google Ads data, Facebook data, Instagram, and consolidating all these different sources together and then transforming and combining that data in interesting ways.
Yeah, I think it's a good synopsis. And why would somebody use that?
It depends. I mean, I think that the basic idea that we talked about is that when you hit the limitations of an external dashboarding tool, then at some point you might want to apply your own complex transformations and find new and interesting ways to mix data from multiple sources. And for that, you're going to need your own data systems. And the most basic way and accessible way these days to do that is with a marketing data warehouse, especially in the cloud.
Yeah, yeah, that seems to fit the type of inquiries we get related to this type of work, right? Where somebody might be doing marketing analysis, in spreadsheets. They're trying to combine all the data in the spreadsheets, or maybe a third-party tool where you can point a data source at it and create reports off of that data directly from the data source, kind of bypassing a database or data warehouse. I think the third type that we see are companies that have maybe more relational type databases that have become data warehouses over the years. This may have been
Exactly.
before the advent of more modern cloud data warehouses, and so they're starting to see the limitations of those types of data warehouses due to scalability or performance, and so they're looking for more options to, because I think the trend we see right now, especially as it pertains to marketing data, and marketing data in this context is ads data, social media, CRM, maybe payment data, any other data you have about customer behavior, your business, and I think kind of everything else in between, anything that would be related to helping you better understand, customer behavior. That data continues to grow. And I don't see any situation where any of these data sources will somehow shrink over the next few years. They will only continue to grow. So
Absolutely. And we see growth in two different ways. So one is that the traditional data warehouse, say back late 90s, early 2000s, was about customer transactions, right? So what did someone purchase? When did they purchase it? When was it shipped? When did it get delivered? Did they return it? These kinds of facts. With the marketing data warehouse, you're getting much closer to hit level data, depending on what kind of source you're talking about. And so that tends to mean that you're at least an order of magnitude bigger than that real traditional, just simple transaction data. The data gets large fast. And then on top of that, you find a big company might have 50 different external data sources that they need to consolidate. They just have all kinds of external companies they're working with to target ads in different areas. And they need to collect all that data. And that also builds a lot of complexity in the data pipelines, because now you need to figure out how to make sense of data from 50 different sources and somehow mix that together.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a huge problem. The making sense of all these multiple data sources is that's a challenge. The challenge we run into quite a bit, where it's just, how do you tie all this data together in a way
Yep.
that provides a coherent picture of customer behavior. It's incredibly challenging because a lot of this data is not at the same grain, not at the same level.
Exactly.
And so,
yeah,
to the best that you can, you have to, at least try and line things up, make inferences. You may have to make synthetic data, which is its own topic, but in the grand scheme of things, it's with this marketing data warehouse, I think the crux of it, once you get the data in, is, well, how do you make sense of it all? And that's, a lot of it depends on your specific use case and the problem you're trying to solve. But
right.
again, I would say that one of the challenges right now is the fact that the data just, unless you're very intentional about your data from the beginning and lining it up with maybe some sort of consistent ID, it's difficult to tie it all together. So.
Well, and you really can't, right? Because these various companies are all moving toward more anonymization and privacy. And the problem you run into is they all kind of have a different approach to that. And so you can't 100% match things up. And so you have to use complex approaches like fuzzy matching and clustering, where you don't 100% know that things line up, but you kind of have an overall picture of what's going on. And to have that level of control to actually be able to run algorithms for clustering, for example, generally you need to have some control of that data and have it in your own data warehouse.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Especially, with something like Google Analytics, 4 coming out, right? So machine learning is now a first-class citizen in GA4, and for good reason, because third-party cookies are, they're, I wouldn't say on their way out, but a lot of browsers and users are becoming a lot more circumspect with respect to how they allow the usage of third-party cookies. And so one aspect of GA4 is that they're going to have, they're going to use machine learning to sort of almost interpolate, users and behavior, because you don't have the visibility that you once had in prior versions of GA with cookies. With that going away, you're going to have something resembling, I don't know if it's synthetic data, but definitely synthetic behavior. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the first changes we saw was with the Beeswax ads platform, where Apple made some changes to Safari, where it became much harder to track users. And so I think all the ad vendors now have to think about, okay, how do we get some reasonable level of visibility into this data, even though we really can't track anymore? And then, yeah, to your point, companies need to figure out what to do with that fuzzy matching as well, and how to bring those sources together in some coherent way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the simplest way to do that would be to combine all your data and put it into something like a marketing data warehouse. Because otherwise, if you're using a third-party tool, you're sort of relying on these third-party tools to have the capabilities to do things like fuzzy matching and more sophisticated aggregations or ML or analysis, right? And so
exactly, yeah. And at that point, we're both big fans of like auto ML solutions, but I think fundamentally what you need is the ability to experiment and tune parameters and play around with things. And you generally, there are some limitations in your ability to do that if you're just in a dashboard platform. You generally need to get lower level access to the data and really have some ownership over it to do this kind of tuning and experimentation.
Yeah, for sure. Data science is, I think, becoming a first-class citizen along with data warehouses. This is more of a general trend.
Right.
So the ability to use notebooks, against your consolidated data, probably in a data warehouse. I would say that's table stakes these days.
Right.
I don't think that that's some awesome add-on that you pay extra for. In my opinion, ML is a first-class citizen these days in any analytics suite, and that includes your ability to analyze and consolidate your data. And so, what we're saying, I think, is there are, I think, reasons why you would use something less sophisticated if you just want a basic dashboarding and reporting. But the nature of the data itself is also changing right now. And so, you would need to, and thankfully, platforms like Google Analytics, I think, are trying to bridge that gap and provide at least as much fidelity into, how they are viewing customer behavior in light of, recent trends with cookies and privacy and so forth. But again, it's the old notion, like your competitors are also becoming more sophisticated and are probably taking more complex approaches with their data than maybe just simple dashboarding and reporting. So if you want to keep up, go for it.
Exactly. And I mean, far be it from us to say that every company should have a data warehouse. Data warehouse is actually going to consume a lot of resources, right? Like, it takes a lot of engineering resources to build out data pipelines and orchestration and all the other pieces that you really need to make that work. However, once you're at a big enough scale where the business value is there, like you said, your competitors are going to be chasing that value, and you kind of need to be doing the same thing to keep up. And as you were saying, the space itself is evolving really fast. And so with a traditional dashboarding tool, those tools tend to kind of fall behind the curve in terms of the latest evolutions in the market. And that's where having the resources to build your own pipelines and evolve quickly really comes in handy.
Yeah, and on that note too, like, why would somebody maybe want to look at a cloud data warehouse for the solution versus, their traditional, like, SQL Server data warehouse that they've used for years? Like, what's the advantage of moving to the cloud for this?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is that there's much less management overhead to go to a cloud data warehouse, and also a cloud data warehouse grows more easily as your needs change, right? So what we've seen again and again is if someone has just a small server on-prem sitting in a closet somewhere, and they may be running Postgres or MySQL or SQL Server or whatever, it's not necessarily the limitations of that database product that cause you issues. It's the fact that you suddenly want to bring in a new data source. Too bad you don't have enough disk space. So now you need to get a new server or install some new disks. You may be delayed by months to get that done. And then you bring in the new data source, and then you want to bring in a new data source. And the nice thing about cloud-oriented data warehouses is that you can just scale up and down when you need to. I mean, when Redshift really blew up, this was a revelation for people. It's not, by modern standards, it's not the easiest cloud data warehouse to scale, but still you could basically just say, I want to scale up to this many nodes. And in a few minutes, you'd be scaled out to that many nodes. And suddenly you could bring in way more data. And then if you decided that you wanted to shut down a data set because it was costing you too much money, you could shut it down and scale down again and cut your costs. And with even more modern solutions like Snowflake and BigQuery, you have even more scalability. And so you can basically store as much data as you want to. You can run as many queries as you want to, as long as you can accommodate the cost for those requirements.
Yeah, and the separation of storage and compute is a really compelling factor.
Yeah.
Because also, you could, I think you have so much more flexibility in terms of how you're going to query and manipulate the underlying data, right?
Right.
So you can't really do that with a traditional, on-prem or even a cloud-based relational database. I would say it ends up being a poor fit inevitably, because it just doesn't. There's only a certain number of rows that'll work, for performant queries, and at some point, like, it stops working, and that's no good, especially as you're trying to evolve your business with data and understand your customers. The last thing you want is to be like pegging your data warehouse, and waiting for data to come back. That's a complete waste of time and money and resources. So we see this a lot. So it's absolutely usually why we're called. So do you have any tips for people that want to get started in cloud data, or I'd say marketing data warehousing or cloud data warehousing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one tip I would have is if you have some experience with SQL, you can start a Snowflake trial or a BigQuery trial within minutes. It's pretty easy to stand up, and you can start playing around with these engines. And then, depending on your engineering resources, you can leverage a tool like Fivetran or Matillion to automate ingestion of a number of different marketing data sources and just kind of kick the tires on some of these tools. And if it's working well for you, then you can decide to make a bigger investment into the tools. Um, Probably for most small organizations that are just getting into data warehousing, they don't want to jump into custom data pipeline code right away. That's something they're going to do down the line. But really the goal is to just get the data in a place where you can start playing around with it and see what value might be there.
And I think there's enough, if you were to maybe even write your own code, there's enough code examples online and on GitHub where you could at least draw inspiration. We definitely don't recommend it out of the box because I would say if you're just like maybe playing around to test how to ingest data, maybe that's fine. But for production data pipelines, nothing's free in this world. Just because you can write code, I would say doesn't mean you should. And I mean, Lord knows we write a lot of code, and I think we still prefer the lazy approach if we can help it, right? So
Yeah, if you can manage.
if you can manage it, yeah. Another tip
Yeah.
I have too is understand the underlying data and the workflow of the data sources.
Yeah.
A big challenge we see is not treating your source data as that source data's provider suggests that you treat the data.
Yep.
So a really good example is Google Analytics, where Google recommends that you retain the underlying view. Like when you first set up analytics, you get a view, and that view should always be the original view, and then you copy that view and filter on top of the copied versions of this. In most cases, we've seen people start editing that original Google Analytics view, and then this has downstream effects because you can't really go back and get the history of that view once it's been altered. So
It's
by
forever. Yeah. Data's
so I
just
mean
gone.
that's an example. I think a classic example we see over and over again, where if instead you have taken the time to learn how that data source needs to be treated and the best practices around that, that goes a long ways towards making your data warehouse much more pristine and useful. Because again, it's the classic garbage in and garbage out. If you can't get good data in, nothing helps you downstream. You have to get this right. So make sure that you take the time and read through the documentation for these data sources. Like understand how do they want you to do stuff. Like read Google Analytics' documentation is fantastic. Like just read about it and understand, okay, so if they have tips, best practices, how should we do that? How do they want us to do it? And just go from there. So
Yeah, another thing we see a lot is that these data sources all kind of have their own way of handling dimensions. And so we see this a lot with Google Analytics, the base level, not the 360 version, where really you can only query so many dimensions at once. You can't get all the raw data through GA with the API. And so you need to decide carefully what dimensions you actually care about and try to extract in those terms. Google Ads actually is kind of similar in this way. Google aggregates the data for privacy purposes, and they only let you combine certain dimensions. So you need to think about, okay, of all these possible reports, which ones do I really care about? Now for Google Ads in particular, there is a nice feature where you can just ingest a bunch of different interesting reports into BigQuery and keep them there and then worry about the details of what you care about later. But if you're using the API, then you kind of have to make some decisions about what your priorities are and understand the underlying data.
right, makes a lot of sense. Well, cool. I think we'll continue having a series on marketing data warehouses. It's something that we keep seeing pop up over and over again, and I think we're barely scratching the surface in terms of our discussions on this. So I guess if that's it, we'll call it a Monday and get to work. So
back to work. Yep.
yeah. All right. Happy Monday. See you, man.
Take care.